Coming up, Wayne County Executive Warren Evans wants to find a better way to fund our cities and counties. He joins us at the desk coming up. Plus, DPS Transition Manager Stephen Rhodes gets an earful from the school board. What will get cut from the budget? And Trump eyes Michigan with help from local Republicans. Big show tonight. Stay with us. Nolan and Stephen are here. My Week starts right now.
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hi there and welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. We are so glad that you're with us here tonight. A lot of talk about money this week. The Detroit School Board gave Transition Manager Stephen Rhodes an earful this week about a forensic audit for the district. The legislature still can't agree on a DPS bailout and are now dealing with a hole in the budget. Revenue estimates were off and Michigan isn't getting as much money as previously thought. We are going to talk about why that is and what might get cut. And what does that mean for funding for Flint? And how about infrastructure in our cities? And that really brings us to a bigger debate over how we pay for services in our cities, in our counties. And is that revenue sharing system broken? One person who says it is Wayne County Executive Warren Evans. He is here with us tonight, along with our My Week contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, it's good to see you. Warren, welcome back to My Week. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
All right. Now, we've had this debate about how we fund our local governments here on My Week. And this is something that Stephen is very passionate about and how he says we've got to kind of rehaul the whole system. And you seem to have stepped up to the plate and said, all right, let's do this. You're going around the state now in the next couple of months and talking to people in several cities and about how we should go about doing this. People will say, well, with the job that you have in Wayne County, where do you even have the time to step out of the box and take this on?
That may be a legitimate question, but I think it's one of those that we have to look at. I mean, somebody has to take the initiative to try to go around and build some kind of consensus about what we ought to do. And it's got to be a statewide consensus, and it's got to be bipartisan if it's ever going to work. One of the things that I found very quickly in Wayne County was, we can figure out how to balance the budget. We can manage much better than we were managed before, but at the end of the day, the dollars aren't there to do the infrastructure stuff, to do the road stuff, to have enough prosecutors to prosecute cases in Wayne County. There's just not enough money in the budget to do the things that the public expects us to do, and quite frankly, that we think we ought to do. And so that's just a problem. The formula, and I think it's a common problem wherever you go in the state. There may be some little nuanced differences, but in reality, the funding for local townships, cities, and counties is not adequate to get the work done.
All right, so what are we doing wrong? What are we doing wrong in Michigan that, say, maybe other states aren't?
Well, I mean, we're at the bottom in the country in terms of the money that we're sending back to local communities. I mean, it kind of originates with us being the global us, which are taxpayers throughout the state. And we're getting a significantly smaller share, continually smaller share of that money coming back to us. Now, I mean, it's an extremely complicated subject, and I am absolutely no expert. And so what we are trying to do is take those experts, the folks from Citizens Research Council and folks from MSU Extension, finance experts who know, number one, how do we get to where we are? And number two, what are some of the potential solutions and what were the pitfalls that helped create a situation where those didn't work in the past? And so we're trying to build consensus and trying to educate ourselves, certainly me, but other local officials as to those things, what the problems are, what can we possibly do about it?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we'd love to see someone like the governor doing, going around the state, building consensus for something like this. But what are you hearing from people in other parts of the state? I mean, generally when we talk about these things here, we're talking about Detroit and Wayne County, Oakland and Macomb to some degree. But I would imagine you're hearing stories from people in other parts of the state that might sound pretty similar.
Yeah, they do, and I think timing in a lot of things is everything. And I think the timing right now is a good one to revisit it, as long as you're revisiting it openly to try to figure out, okay, what are solutions that benefit all of us, not short-term grabs at things. And I mean, when you see the economy improving, and then you see that the revenue is not improving at all, it's kind of a shock to folks. Okay, wait, I understand when things are bad and we lose revenue, but when things are better, where's the additional revenue? And so I think it's becoming more critical.
How much do the pensions and other retiree costs drive this problem, not just in Wayne County, but in other parts of the state? I mean, I know if you go to places that people think of as wealthy and stable and look at their pension shortfalls, their unfunded liabilities for healthcare, those are all off the charts. How much of the problem is that?
It's sure a big part of the problem, because obviously if we weren't paying, the catch up to get pensions where they should be, or paying off unfunded liabilities and OPEB, there'd be more operating dollars in the budget to provide services. So it's a big part of it. To what extent?
But is it something you could stay ahead of no matter what changes are made in funding, no matter how much additional resources you got? Some of these communities are paying 50% or more of their general fund budget or of their budget to pay for retiree health care and pensions. I don't know what your percentage is. I know you've brought it down, but that goes up all the time. You've got suburban communities with retiree workforces 2 and 3 times the size of their serving workforce, and still have provisions in place where people can go out in their 50s and retire and start collecting their full pension. You did yourself. And so how in the world can taxpayers ever stay ahead of that if we don't get the cost side of this fixed first?
Well, obviously the cost side has to be contained. And in Wayne County, we made a concerted effort to start working on that. I mean, it's such a complex problem till I think the only way to do it is to go around, educate ourselves, listen to what folks throughout the entire state are seeing, hearing, and try to get together and deliberately think through what are some of the ways, what are the options that we have, and what might we do to at least make it better.
But it is a big ask to go out to taxpayers and say, look, we want more from you to fund an operation when you still have Wayne County commissioners who have decided they're not going to sacrifice. They're going to collect full-time pay for part-time work. They're going to continue to get their health care and pensions, and they're going to ask taxpayers to fund that? I mean, don't you have to fix your fundamental problems first, Warren?
Sure, but I think the design here is not to go out and ask the taxpayers to pony up more. That's not what this is about. This is about how do we reallocate the funds that are currently here, and if there's got to be some more bleeding, and let's spread the bleeding out some more. This is no cover for the opportunity to ask the taxpayers for more. I mean, whether it's the jail or other things, I've been pretty adamant about. I think we've been beaten up enough, and I'm not looking for that, but I am looking for solutions, reallocations of state resources, and if in fact we get to the end of that road and there's a need for additional dollars, then I think the onus is on us in government to cut the costs and do the things so that if taxpayers sign on for anything else, they're not buying a pig in a poke. I absolutely agree.
Well, talking about taxpayers signing on to something else, there's also that conversation that maybe more cities or townships, they should be having an income tax instead of the collection from the property tax. But we see in some of the larger cities like Detroit and like Flint who have had that, but they've still had financial problems.
And a bunch of cities who have said, no, we're not going to do that.
Right.
And I think their no is not necessarily that they're against a local income tax. They're against what they see is an overtaxed environment that they're in without getting benefit for local services out of it. And I would certainly have to agree with them.
Yeah, I mean, part of what you're talking about here is that split between what the state keeps, that it collects, and what comes to local governments. And I saw a chart a few weeks ago by the Michigan Municipal League that shows we are dead last in the growth of that share that comes to local governments nationwide. And so pensions or OPEB or not, we just aren't giving municipalities their fair share even of
And if they need to use part of that fair share to pay OPEB,
Right.
then let them do it, but
Right.
you're not giving them the fair share in the first place. I do agree that there's an awful lot of work, to be done there. The urgency for us is it's not getting any better. Mm-hmm. There's some economic improvements, but the revenue sharing or whatever it is not coming back. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I'm starting to learn now. So, statutory revenue sharing, you got constitutional revenue sharing.
Yeah.
It's odd that a county with nothing but constitutional officers and constitutional responsibilities gets not a penny in constitutional revenue sharing. I mean, I don't get the logic. It's a complex problem. I'm certainly not the guy to solve it. But I didn't see anyone else coming forward saying, let's start pulling the resources together, talk through it. And we got a bunch of experts that are there with us who do this for a living.
But I think it's interesting that you're at least starting to have the conversations, and I'll be interested to hear what kind of feedback you get from other parts of the state after you finish this kind of tour of the state over the next couple of months. While we have you here, I want to talk a little bit or ask you about the jail project and where that fits into what your plans are, and where it's fitting into this larger conversation of a soccer stadium and the plans that Dan Gilbert wants to have in bringing MLS to Detroit, and specifically looking at that spot that Wayne County has.
Well, we're still going down the path that we were going down before to try to, by the end of the summer, put out an RFP to finish the jail. I mean, for a number of internal reasons, we've got to get a jail, and we've got to get one quickly. The costs of maintaining and repairing the existing structures is crazy. It's killing us. We've had a couple discussions since the big press conference, sort of thing with those who wanted to build a stadium. And it's been real clear to them, because they've regurgitated to me that, they're going to try to get into the timeline that we have and see if they can propose something that guarantees that the overage costs, the difference between what it would take for me to finish the jail and the rest of it is covered and guaranteed by somebody.
What's that number? What's that number?
I wish I could tell you, Nolan, but
You have a ballpark?
I have a ballpark on finishing the jail. And
Which is?
Ballpark $250.
Where are you going to get that money?
Well, we'll be able to bond and do that. I mean, it's
$250 ahead of $250
above the $150 we've already
spent.
Yeah. I mean, we'll be able to bond and get that done. That's in our wheelhouse. We've looked at that. We're working through it. We'll be able to do that. The difference between that roughly $250 and what it would take to build another courthouse, another juvenile detention facility, and another jail is significantly higher than that. I don't know what those numbers are, and I'm not a math major, but building 3 structures
have to be more.
Is going to be significantly more, and all I'm saying is I've got a finite number that at least will be ironed out pretty soon in terms of what Wayne County taxpayers will have to pay to finish this jail. Anything over that,
That's
got to be somebody's
It sounds
issue.
like hundreds. It could be hundreds of millions, and you would be expecting the Angoras and Gilbert to pay for that, or who would pay for that overage?
I really don't care who they get to pay for it. It won't be Wayne
Do
County
you get
taxpayers.
any sense they're willing to go that deep to get this site?
I do, but it's always easy, as you know, for someone to philosophically say we can pick up the difference until you've actually figured out exactly what the cost of the difference is. I don't know what that's going to be, but I know it would be ridiculous in my mind for me to slow down our process while that goes on. We've had a jail sitting there partially finished for 3 years. I mean, at some point, it's not going to be salvageable. There are a number of things going on here that don't allow me to, in good conscience, slow down and wait for them to catch up. We've been working on this jail for 15 months. They've known we were working on it for 15 months and haven't been a part of the discussion significantly for 15 months. If they can come in the next few months and work wonders, I'll be as happy as anybody.
All right. Wayne County Executive Warren Evans, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Christy.
The transition manager of the Detroit Public Schools, Stephen Rhodes, met with the Detroit School Board this week. The board wants a forensic audit of contracts. It's something the teachers union has been calling for as well. Rhodes said there's no money for an audit, but he would be behind it if they had specifics about what that audit would be about. And how helpful, I guess, would having a forensic audit be at this point, Nolan?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Stephen, if you'd like to
Forensic
start.
audit is one of these words that people like to use
Throw
because
around.
they think it sounds really important and really significant.
And very
it is.
technical.
Yeah, I mean, and there are some things that you can learn through a forensic audit, and we may learn some things about DPS that would help us understand how the system got to the place that it is. I think the laser focus on it is something of a red herring. It's not going to do what people think it's going to do, which is going to show that all the money was stolen by the state or by contractors or things like that. I mean, you know, it is not this sort of magical reveal that people have made it out to be. At the same time, it is worth looking back to see what did happen to this district over the time that it has been in state hands and you know, was promised to be made better and turned around, and that didn't happen. That's an inquiry that I think the state should be very interested in pursuing and accounting to Detroiters for what happened.
But you're saying the cost analysis of how much it would cost to do an audit like that, what would be the reward out of
money
getting
better
it?
spent keeping your paychecks flowing and your schools open. I think you could do what Steve's talking about with legislative hearings. It's going to be a very expensive exercise, and you know, these folks on the school board said, no problem, we'll just cut you a check. These folks who control no money at this time, and there's really every dime this district has or is going to get has to go into keeping the schools open and funding this transition, because at this point it looks highly unlikely they're going to get the full $200 million out of the state. There's going to be some sort of compromise that will lessen that amount. And the $200 million, the more you look at the $200 million, the more it appears to have been pulled from full thin air. The House keeps asking for an accounting. How are you going to spend the money? They can't break it down smaller than 25 million chunks. So I think once we get down to what it's going to take to operate this district, what's the essential amount to get them through and start letting the savings kick in, I think it's going to be somewhat less than $200 million anyway.
All right, well, this kind of segues into our next topic of conversation, but can you ever really itemize before that you pass a bill exactly what the $200 million is going to be spent on?
You need to do a better job than they've done. They pulled out, the state treasurer pulled out a sort of rough accounting at the last minute. I don't think you can ask these lawmakers to pass a bill that large without giving him one, more accounting, and better idea of how the money's going to be.
Yeah, but I also have an argument with last minute part of it too. These conversations could have been had. I think that the state treasurer could have come out a little
There's also the question of, again, what's the alternative? If you don't give them the money, you absolutely guarantee that they fail.
Oh, you've got to give them money. There's no question about that. It's the amount
this sort of nickel and diming, which should have been done for the 16 years that the state was overseeing the schools, and it wasn't because money was going all over the place. I mean, it's a little disingenuous now.
But it's a hard sell to ask lawmakers to fund things for this district that their district's not getting. Every district in the state has needs, and these folks are going to go. I'm talking about the politics of it. These folks got to go home and say, yeah, we cut this check to Detroit so they could have this program and that program and that program. You got to win.
Okay, well, now let's talk about the fact that they're going to have to cut that check, and they don't have as much money to pull the check from. Okay, so we got the revenue estimates this week. Now that about $333 million, they've got a budget hole. And so now the question is, when you've got that kind of deficit and said, well, the estimates that we had weren't quite on, who's going to suffer for that? And now when you have that larger conversation about DPS, and now you've got for Flint, who's going to suffer now? Where are they going to find that money?
It's going to be a very difficult budget. It's going to be hard for them. It's going to force them perhaps more than they have since 2008, 2009 era to set priorities. I mean, because you also have Flint. We don't know yet the cost of that. Once you weigh in not only the infrastructure and the remediation of the damage that's been done, but the lawsuits. And that's a big number out there. I think it could rival the amount of money that they're having to give back in these tax breaks that were negotiated with business a decade ago. I think it could be a big, unexpected, unanticipated hit to the budget.
So when you talk about who may suffer for this or what's going to get cut from that, you also got to take a look back and say, okay, how do we get here in the first place? And it is taking a look at the old Michigan business tax, and now it's that we're still paying that off.
MBT is part of the problem, but the new tax is part of the problem too. It relies on taxes and revenues that are not as stable as what we used to have. We used to do things this way in the 70s and part of the 80s, I think, here in Michigan, and it's more volatile. And so you've got to prepare for years where it's off. This was the warning that they were given when they reformed taxes and gave $1.8 billion break to businesses in 2011. And again, it's a little like, how come nobody's listening?
But
I mean,
listen,
this is predictable kinds of economic activity, and then we act surprised when it turns out the way that everybody knows is
I
going
think
to turn
anybody's
out.
surprised. These companies are claiming the credits they were given. The Michigan business tax was a horrible tax. If it weren't a horrible
Everybody agrees
tax,
with that.
we wouldn't have had to give $1 billion or more in relief to these companies to get them to come here and do business here. We did cut business taxes, but we were cutting business taxes on a selective basis well before this reform was put in place.
Agreed.
Now we have a more rational tax system, and we're not giving
Slightly
those
more
guys,
rational.
we're not giving those individual tax
Okay,
breaks
so if you
out.
say,
They are
if you
doing-
say,
and
it's,
they
a
also are
slightly, if you
doing
say
that.
it's a slightly
Not
more
much.
rational thing, then what do you envision more change to the tax code? I mean,
Well,
what do you
I mean,
want to see?
You know, number one, there should have been provisions to make sure that people who are getting the tax cut were creating jobs. I mean, right now everybody gets the tax breaks, whether you create jobs or whether you don't. And the job creation, according to U of M, has not been any greater than it would have been if not for the tax cuts. It's kept pace with what the national recovery has been. So that was one thing that should have been done.
We weren't doing that before.
We weren't doing that before, but the whole country wasn't doing it before. We were in a
We
recession.
had 10 years we weren't keeping pace with the rest
Understood.
of the
I'm
country.
not saying
Steve.
it didn't have any effect. I mean, all of these things have some effect. The question is, how efficient are they, and how much do they end up costing you on the back end? There are better ways to make the tax code more rational for businesses and to generate more steady revenue that they just didn't think about and they didn't look at, because the goal was to give the tax break, and it wasn't to implement rational tax policy. That is what the Republican side of the aisle too often gets caught up in.
The basic problem here is we have to pay $1 billion in tax credits to companies who are fulfilling the job-creating promises they made during the during the Granholm years. We had to give away tax credits to get people to come here, and so it's $1 billion hole in this budget. You take away that, we've got plenty of money to do the things we need, but we had to do that then to get business to come here.
Any chance that they have to tap into the rainy day fund to fill this hole?
I think if the choice is tap the rainy day fund or cut back on things like Flint or DPS, the other investments. I mean, state government has been heavily underinvested in for the last 10 or 15 years. I think that's what the rainy day fund is partially for. It's not, you wouldn't want to deplete it, but this is.
But there's a cost to that, Steve. There's a cost to that.
But it doesn't get more
understood.
catastrophic than what happened in Flint and what's happening
Right,
at
what's
DPS.
the cost you're talking about?
You want to avoid that as if you possibly
at all
can,
possible.
because there's a cost to that. The rainy day fund helps keep your bond rating healthy, helps keep your bond, it helps keep your expenses down. So it's not like free money sitting there like, oh gosh, let's run to the store
Of course
and spend
not.
it.
Let's run to the store and spend that money.
Of course not.
All right.
But here's where
last
that
word on this.
imbalance comes in. Is it about money or is it about people? Flint was about people. You spend the money to make sure that they're taken care of.
All right. And finally tonight, a little politics. The Trump campaign is targeting Michigan, wants to flip it from a Democratic sure thing. Does he have a shot? So we're starting to hear this percolating, Nolan. What do you think?
I'm not going to give any sort of prediction anymore on this election. I've been wrong every step of the way. If you'd have listened to me, you would have been sitting here and Trump wouldn't be your nominee. And
John Kasich would be the nominee?
And so, I've been wrong every step of the way. You've got some things that indicate he can do it. I mean, you've got such an odd situation. The Fox poll came out yesterday. Both of these candidates have negative ratings above 50%. When you start a race like that, anything can happen. I mean, America doesn't like these two candidates. And so, who can turn out big numbers of new voters? Trump has a chance of doing that. I'm sure Hillary Clinton has a chance of turning out new voters. She's still struggling to put away Bernie Sanders. She's still losing primaries. I think anything can happen.
So does she? So the question is, does she have a shot in Michigan? I thought it was very interesting seeing Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley came out this week saying we should all rally around Trump.
He's joined the parade of fools who've hitched their wagon to Donald Trump. I'm not sure what the thinking is there, or why they think that there won't be consequences for them. And here's somebody who, expresses some interest in a gubernatorial run. Boy, that's going to be really tough to pull off after going down with this.
We'll see.
With this
20
Trump,
seconds left.
We'll
Nolan.
see if Trump overperforms in Michigan. It won't be the case. And you look at the key state polls from Ohio, Florida, and Pennsylvania, and he's overperforming what people expect.
It's going to be interesting to see what tactics they take here, though.
In the end, it's about demographics. The numbers that he would need of white voters, 75%, never happen.
I've seen polls that indicate he could get up to 20% of
We're
black
going to have
voters.
to take the argument offline, because that's going to do it for MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, mark your calendar. We're heading up to the Mackinac Policy Conference in 2 weeks. MiWeek is on the road. We're going to be covering everything that happens on the island among the state's biggest decision makers. MiWeek will be on 7:30 p.m. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night of the conference, so you won't miss a thing. That's June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Can't wait to have all that fudge. So check us out at MiWeek.org and on social media. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next time for MiWeek. Take care.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.